My name is Carolyn Myss, and I'm a medical intuitive. And what that means is I have the ability to read energy, read and interpret the energy that the human body generates. And that energy contains data. What type of data? It tells me the data about your biography. And what I've come to believe is that your biography becomes your biology. And so by accessing the information that's in your bioenergetic field, that provides a whole new range of data that physicians can use to help in the healing process or to help to understand why someone has in fact become ill. Well, I would say this, uniformly, all illness is an energy block. Right. Let's start with that as a fundamental premise. And what we're learning as we enter this new age of consciousness, we've been hanging out in it now in the foothills of consciousness for the last 30 or 40 years. What we've begun to realize about ourselves is that we influence what happens to our body, that we are not simply random victims of disease, that somehow we can accommodate the development of illness. And the general social mind has accepted the toxicity of alcohol and of smoking and of certain food products. But what we're also realizing, and this I think is making more of an impression too, is that beyond the physical contribution to our body that we have authority over, that is to say what we eat and whether or not we exercise and etc., we also influence what happens to our body by the quality of our thoughts and by the quality of our general attitudes about life itself. Now, under that category, which is, as we can well realize, a very broad category, but under that category, one would have to say that I've discovered through my teaching numerous workshops all over the world, which I have done now since 1987, that one's general attitude about life contributes a great deal toward the health of one's immune system, toward the health of your general rapport with this thing called anxiety and stress, all right? And that another major contributing force is your sense of self-esteem. A third major contributing force is your sense of honor. What I never realized at all until I wrote my recent book, Anatomy of the Spirit, was I never recognized the role that honor played in the maintenance of health, nor in the process of healing, nor in the breakdown of health. That is to say, do dishonorable acts poison the body? And I'd have to say, yes, indeed they do. There's yet another thing I would add, and that's that in our emphasis in this New Age field about the fact that we create our own health, as it were, I think we've come across a truth that is, how do I say this, eternally true, but we are not yet mature enough to manage that truth. So that, for the most part, I don't think we tend to reduce that incredible truth to a personality choice, not realizing that that truth resonates to the soul versus the personality. And in understanding those differences, you have people saying, why would I choose cancer? And they don't remember consciously choosing it, or when they evaluate themselves to look for negativity, all they do is evaluate themselves at the most superficial level, like I'm not mad today and I wasn't mad yesterday, therefore why am I sick? And they don't realize that we're dealing with long-term soul personality attitudes that are much deeper than the temporary evaluation of one's personality as to whether or not one has been happy or not for the last month. And another thing I would add, and that's that in our effort to try to capture and control the nature of health and disease, which is what we're trying to do, I don't think we're going to master this as quickly as we think, nor do I think we're going to master it at all. I think it will always be one step ahead of us, this vague thing called health, this elusive thing called death, right? Because we aren't meant to stay here forever. That's simply not the case. So as long as we would like to, for as much as we'd like to prolong our lives, perhaps forever on good days and hardly to supper time on bad days, the fact is we don't really, I don't believe, have that kind of authority. I think we have authority over the quality, perhaps, of our lives, but I'm not certain that we do over the longevity factor. And finally, my last thing is that I think there's a whole category of people who become ill, and it has nothing to do with negativity as we understand it. I think one needs to recognize that illness is oftentimes a form, the way in which one receives direction in one's life, to change one's life, to go to become a different kind of person. And sometimes the teacher is illness, meaning that the source of it is not negativity, but rather it comes under an entirely different category. Well, The Creation of Health was a book that I wrote with my dear colleague Norman Shealy, who's a neurosurgeon and an expert in pain management in the United States. Norm and I started working together as a team. I am the obvious medical intuitive, he the physician. And we began working together way back in 1984. And at that point, I was living in New Hampshire, and Norm was living where he still does, which is in Springfield, Missouri. And he would call me with a patient in his office, and he would say, you know, I have Mary Jones in my office, and her age is 30. And I would start to get impressions, and these impressions would be about energetic patterns that related to specifically this person's background, or the stress this person was under, or issues, people that this person was still energetically clinging to in such a way that it was draining the individual. Well, eventually I got clear enough to where I could see the development of illness in the energetic field. I would say to Norm, if this patient doesn't deal with this issue, then within 4 to 6 months he will have pancreatic cancer. And what Norm would do then, of course, is he would focus his attention on getting the patient to deal with the psychological, emotional issue, withholding all the while my evaluation that said if this issue was not reconciled, then this illness would be the result. Through all these years, we had so many illnesses that resulted and so many illnesses that did not result, if you will, that we realized that I was very accurate at helping people. If they could change a pattern in the energetic field, there was a real likelihood they would not then get the physical illness. The other, what we did in this book is we told these case stories, and the rich part about Creation of Health is that it has what I realized in working with Norm is that there are specific energetic patterns behind the development of each illness. They are not random. There's a reason why pancreatic cancer, let's just deal with the pancreas for example. The pancreas is the organ in the body that is most affected by issues of responsibility. Now, what I realized is that when someone goes through, let's say, issues of low self-esteem, the pancreas, low self-esteem automatically converts to, I'm afraid to take responsibility for my life. It just makes you feel like you won't be able to do that. That can trigger a craving for something. What? It triggers an obsessive response in the pancreas. So you either crave alcohol or you crave food. All right? It also can lead to the development, I believe, of pancreatic cancer, diabetes, or the other side of the issue of responsibility. I want to emphasize something. When I talk about The energetic causes of illness, I want to emphasize that I'm talking about extreme cycles. I'm talking about people who feel that they're responsible for everybody and it never lets up. They burn themselves out, and that, of course, creates a pancreatic problem. Every part of the body relates to certain issues of power and issues of stress, and that's what Norm and I articulated in The Creation of Health, and we back these up with all of our case studies. Well, how is this looked upon by traditional medical? Well, you know what? I would have to say not bad, because instead of getting the criticism that you think we would get, we've been invited to speak again and again and again at hospitals, at the American Holistic Medical Association, which, by the way, Norm founded. So I have rarely, in fact, I can't even remember an incident where I've been met with a negative response by physicians, nor have I ever received a negative letter in all my years in the field. And I think the reason is, and I think it's worth saying, and that's that Norm is a physician, and I have a PhD, and I'm a theologian. I mean, my background is also that I am. We're educated people. And our journey in life has not been to criticize conventional medicine. That's rather to see how conventional medicine and energy medicine can work in a team. And I think because that's been our goal, if you will, our underlying belief system, we have not met with opposition because we haven't provided any. Well, I want to emphasize something, that's that nobody has to come to me. I mean, all I need is your name, age, and permission. So I rarely have seen the people that I've worked with. Instead, I prefer to negotiate over the phone. That is to say, I usually receive letters from people who will say, would you help me out? I'm in this kind of situation. And then what I would do is I would contact them, and I would schedule an appointment with me for an hour. And I told them the rules. These are the rules. 1, you ask any questions you want of me during that 1 hour, and 2, you do not provide me with any other information. The less I know, the better. And then I did my reading, and I always did my reading before my appointment with somebody. It would take about 45 minutes to get the kind of information that I needed. And I'd begin to get impressions. I'd like to say it was dramatic, but it's not. It's actually the most undramatic chapter of my life. It is absolutely effortless. And here is where we run into a problem, because our vocabulary does not accommodate the description of the way this kind of information comes. It is not 5 sensory. So if you say to me, do I see something? No, I don't see anything. Do I hear anything? No, I don't hear anything. Do I taste anything? No, I don't taste anything. It is not 5 sensory. Done. End of it. It is a 6th sensory perceptual ability, which means we can call it a way of personally knowing impersonal information. That's the best way I could put it. And I could sense that information. I could sense the data. It has a feel to it, shall we use that word, in my psyche, in which I realize it doesn't belong to me. This is not information that's generated from my history or from my life. And I'm so accustomed now to receiving these impressions when I do this. It happens so fast that I just write them down. I jot them down very, very rapidly, and I'm used to that frequency, if you will. And then I interpret that information. I go through the body, I scan the body, I scan a person's history, and I scan where they're what I call losing their power, to events, to people, to memories, to attitudes. How much of their power. The way I teach my students is this. I want you to imagine that you have $100 worth of energy to spend every day. That's the size of your allowance. And that if you spend any more than $15 on managing your history, you're going to run into a health risk. You need at least $85 every day to manage your present day life. When in fact, what it is with most people is that $85 goes into the management of their history. They need to keep their divorce alive. They need to keep their childhood alive. They need to keep people they resent alive. They need to keep people they haven't forgiven alive. They need to keep all kinds of fears going about who's going to say what about them today. Everything that distracts from their present focus of what they should be creating that day, what they should be learning that day, where their attention should be focused. Instead, it's loosely distributed so that what I've come to realize is that, what I do with people is that I help them to see where they've invested their spirit, and then we talk about ways in which they can call their spirit back, or unplug their circuits from these targets in their history. It's an energetic field that surrounds your body, and I would say it is probably extends the length of your arm if you were to stand up, and I would say spin, do like the little children do when they stand up and they twirl. This is about the size of it. It goes around like this, and it's an energetic field that's generated from probably two things. One, the energy within you, and two, the energy coming to you. The prana, the general life force, if you will. The chakras are energy data banks that maintain an energetic, what's the good word for it? Calibration, if you will. Each one, there are 7 of them in the body directly. There's probably mini ones, but I'm not interested in those. I'm interested in the major ones. And the 7 major ones start at the base of the spine and work their way up through the body to the crown. Each one has a different vibration to it, a different color to it, a different tone to it. It's got a different density to it. Each one, in my opinion, contains different types of information. And that's when I do a reading on someone, I'm accessing your chakra system. I'm reading the data that becomes the data of your life in an energetic form that gets converted into what scientists are now referring to as your cell memory. Because that's indeed exactly what's happening. You're taking your biography and you're converting it into your biology. I think everyone has the ability to be self-intuitive, right? And that would apply to their own medical skill of evaluating whether or not you're losing your power. I do workshops teaching people to monitor their energy so that they can become very sensitive to when they're losing energy, why, and to whom. But do I think everybody could become skilled at being a medical intuitive? No, I don't, any more than if you'd ask me, do I think everybody could become a wonderful painter? The answer is no. I'd give you the same answer, right? I think everyone can learn to paint, but no, not everybody's a painter. So it's as simple as that. But I do not want to treat this in that category of it being a gift. I think I have I'm unusually accurate. And maybe that's because I'm part of the very small handful of medical intuitives that are meant to perhaps introduce the skill, so we have to be exaggeratedly good. You know, there's a word for you. Well, what I would call that is what it means to take a negative pattern that you have within yourself. Let's say a negative pattern like that you always fear the worst about yourself, right? You're always very negative and very apprehensive, that people are always talking about you and you're always the one that's going to get fired and no one ever likes you, and every time something goes wrong at the office you're convinced it has something to do with you. Right. Now that kind of pattern, which as we both know is as common as air, is lethal to the human body. I mean, it drains you. I mean, it takes all the juice out of your gut, out of your colon, eventually your lower back, because it'll convert to some kind of financial issue. So now what are you going to do about that? What I help people realize is, first of all, that you need to work on, let's look at this from another point of view. Why are we so interested in becoming conscious? What does that mean, to become conscious? It means to become aware of exactly what we're thinking, what we're feeling, to become aware of our awareness system itself, so that we actually can get so sensitive that we get to the point where we realize that we can shift a thought form and make energy come to us, or transfer energy to another person, or sense when we're losing energy to an illusion. For example, if I were to come up to you and say, there's a lot of people predicting that the stock market's going to crash and we're all going to go through a very dismal time. Very often, if you said that to someone, you'd see them pale right in front of you, because you could feel their energy leaving their body and connecting to that negative thought, giving that negative thought authority. And from that point on, that negative thought form has authority over that person's biology. Now, what it means to become conscious is to get to the point through discipline. Consciousness requires discipline. There is no other way about it. Either the discipline is you take it up in meditation, you take it up in exercise, but you cannot become conscious without becoming disciplined. It is not possible. You don't just decide to change your attitude in the blink of an eye, because it doesn't work that way. You have to work at it. You have to recognize, I have a negative attitude, and this is how I'm going to change it. I'm not going to use any of the vocabulary that goes with that attitude. And every time I think about that attitude, I'm either going to say a prayer, or I'm going to touch a blue dot, or I'm going to sing a song. I'm going to distract myself, because I will not give that negative attitude any authority over me ever again. Now, that is an internal discipline system. The fact is, I rarely meet people who are strong enough to do that. They want a quick fix, you see, and consciousness is not a quick fix journey. And if it were, we'd have a lot more conscious people on the planet. I think that consciousness, the capacity to transcend negativity, the more impersonal, and this is where I'd have to say Buddha was probably accurate, the more impersonal you can become about the so-called tragedies you see or that you work with, the more healing you are to the people you work with. You don't do anyone any good by approaching them with the attitude of, isn't this awful what happened to you? And feeding that their fear, their negativity, or their resentment. That's when you take it with you. When you walk into and you treat it as if it's no different than whether or not they just won the lottery or just had an accident, you see them neutrally as simply two events. Well, the part of your body that deals with sexuality, money, creativity is your second chakra, right? Which is your lower back, hips, sexual genital area. What do I mean by that? I mean, I want you to imagine that you have 100 circuits of energy coming in through the top of your head, right? Just like I said earlier, $100, now we're going to change it to 100 circuits. And that energy goes down through your body, and you attach yourself to attitudes that then convert to what happens to your energy. So let's imagine everybody goes through a cycle. Most people spend their entire life in this cycle, never getting out of it, of the power issues that are rooted in sexuality and creativity, territorial rights, and money. That part of the body that absorbs the wear and tear from that is your sexual genital area and your lower back and your hips. So let me give you an example. You'll notice that how often it's almost a given in our society that when a couple goes through a major shift of money, when a massive amount of money comes to one or the other partner, that marriage is going to break up, because they're going to find they'll want a partner of a different financial standing with them, or they'll have a need to explore their sexuality because money seems to trigger the right to sexual freedom. Am I making sense to you? Okay? And very similarly, when somebody loses a lot of money, they tend to lose their sexual energy too. They feel, quote, impotent, and that sense of impotency crosses every single spectrum of their life. They'll feel sexually impotent. They'll feel creatively impotent. They lose it across the board. First of all, you have to get, quote, conscious of it, right? Secondly, you have to then want to make a change. It's the same thing I tell you. It reads like the Alcoholic Anonymous program. Those 12 steps are essentially universal steps that can apply to no matter what change you want to make in your life. Then 3, you may have to seek a support person for it as you begin to choose a more empowered life pattern for yourself and then stick to that pattern. Now, this is where I think it's worth mentioning something, and that's that what I've recognized in my work is that people are afraid of getting healthy. People are terrified of healing because no matter what lifestyle you have, whether it is drawing, if a life pattern is any life pattern, you form a survival group around it. It's number 1. And number 2, no matter what pattern you have, no matter how negative it is, it affords you at a deep level a sense of control over your life. Healing throws you out of control. You become totally out of control when you start the healing process, because all your familiar patterns are not allowed anymore. All right? So you must be willing to enter chaos, and that chaos is an enormous kind of chaos because it causes you to evaluate everything, your relationships, your lifestyle, everything from what you eat to who you eat with. And oftentimes, in order to really heal, a person needs to leave behind everything and everyone they know. Well, give me an example of that. Well, let's imagine you're a battered woman. Let's imagine you're a battered woman and you finally develop breast cancer. You think you can stay in that marriage and in that environment and heal yourself? I don't think so. I don't even think it takes it just takes common sense to say, you want to get out, you have got to get out and move your entire life forward. Now, for a lot of people, that degree of change is so overwhelming, and the reality of having to start up a life in shall we say, a whole new orbit with an entirely different atmospheric pressure is so challenging that what happens is people get what I call caught between orbits. The old orbit that made them sick and the new orbit they're afraid to get into. And they spend the rest of their life on the bridge between these two orbits, running back to this old one and accessing the new one merely through workshops and through lectures and through books, because they'll send their mind into this new orbit, but their body remains in the old one. The 4th chakra is probably mission control, okay? Because it's the center of emotion. It's your emotional data bank. And the way I teach it is the 4th chakra is, of course, lies between your lower self and your higher self, right? Your lower self relating to your first, second, and third chakras, which deal with external power and how you relate to power in the outside meaning of it, sexuality, money, stuff, accomplishments, things. Your upper self relates to how you relate to your internal self, your interior journey, your mind, your sense of reality. The journey between these two parts resonates completely to the emotional body, to your sense of emotion. What we mean by love is the key force to all life. It's not just love. It's a force much bigger. It's hope. It's the life force. It's the capacity to feel life itself. That resonates in the fourth chakra of your body. And all of us go through stages of maturing that emotion. We first learn to love our biological family. Then we learn to love friends. The next stage is the third chakra, where can we learn to love ourselves? Okay? We go in exactly that order. Now, if we do well with those three lessons, which is the first, second, and third chakra, we go through a test, a tremendous test, what I call the Judas experience, where we have to undergo a tremendous act of forgiveness. It's just built into the system for whatever reason. And those who make it through that eye of the needle enter the journey toward becoming consciously transcendent. Consciously conscious.
How do one do this through meditation?
No, through. Have you ever needed to forgive anything?
Mm-hmm, of course.
Big, huge?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever done it?
Mm-hmm.
Big, huge?
Mm-hmm.
That's the key, where you can get yourself to let go of the things that don't matter and live in that cycle. And that becomes a lifestyle. And every time you're faced with the ordinary stuff of life that literally does not matter to you, in the sense of I'm not going to let something as insignificant as whether or not whether you got a parking space or not, or whether or not you got the, quote, job promotion you wanted. No matter what it is, you tell yourself, that's not big enough to lose my spirit over. I'm simply not going to do it. Now, you become better and better at that, because that's what forgiveness, the capacity to forgive, somehow or other is connected to becoming conscious of how well you manage your spirit in ordinary life. And somehow becoming a forgiving and loving person allows you to have access to a sense of yourself that gives you insight and strength. Maybe it's that you can suddenly hear guidance or become aware of guidance that you're not aware of in a denser level when you're so busy competing and trying to be first. That whether or not you're first is irrelevant, which makes becoming first all the more easy if you understand the way the divine works. Do you see what I mean? But all of this is part of the management of the emotional self. If you look at every spiritual tradition teaches the language of God as being divine paradox. Just when you think you've lost everything, you've gained it all. Just when Abraham thought he was going to kill his son, he was given not only his son back, but 12 kingdoms in all of Israel. You must understand that pattern of divine paradox operates at all times, and somehow the fourth chakra is the test of whether or not you trust it. You know, people think forgiveness is the ability to say, I know they didn't mean it, but their jaw clenches. Really, they think forgiveness is the ability to go into a therapist's office and scream about something. But it's not. It's the ability to operate through divine paradox, which is, okay, I have to trust there was a reason for this. I may not have liked it, but I'm letting it go. And then you see the good that comes of it. But it's not until that point that you let go of the package that you can see the essence of what was there all the time. But you have to let go of the messenger so you can get the message. When you become a forgiving person, you change your biology. Let's bring it back to basics. You change your biological code. Your body seems to heal faster from things. Your body seems to regenerate itself faster. Your body has a healthier immune system. For totally selfish reasons, ironically, and in keeping with the nature of divine paradox, the most selfish thing you can do is to become forgiving. You are focused on living an external life where you're working through issues of power in an external way versus an internal way. Your heart, your will, your mind will ride a back seat to those issues of power. You'll make choices, you'll love, but you'll love according to how you define power. You'll love people who bring you power. You'll negotiate your spirit for power. You'll make choices that further your sense of power. So of course your will works, right?
Gotcha, okay.
All right?
It works on a different level.
It works on a different level. You've calibrated it to the physical level. But this is where you must understand something. When you get yourself into trouble, you get yourself into, not you, but when a person gets themselves, him, herself into trouble, and they need to have a spirit strong enough to heal their biological structure, that level of will won't do it. That's when you need to begin the journey of saying, I have to develop a more conscious level of will. I need to develop that interior self and to become conscious of why I'm here on in this lifetime and for what purpose I'm alive. And that's a very different level of willpower. And that's that journey from the external unconscious will to the internally conscious will. That requires the dark night of the soul. The sixth chakra is totally delicious because the sixth chakra is where you manage reality. Okay? And again, here, remember that when you're growing up, your mind is organized for you by your tribe, by your school, by your social energy, by your initial tribe growing up, so that you have a sense of identity. It may be, American or whatever country you're from, and then your sense of your ethnic group and your sense of, and all of that converts to a sense of reality, so that if you grow up in a Christian, if you tended to grow up in, let's say like I did, a Catholic background, then it did not include the notion of reincarnation or chakras or any of that. That was not in Catholic teachings. So my family scripted my initial reality for me, and eventually, and a lot of people remain totally scripted in that initial tribal reality. But for me, I had to break out of it. It wasn't big enough, right? So what I would do is I would leave my tribal thinking and I'd run over to the larger sense of reality that says, oh, look at this. Over here I have options in terms of reincarnation, and I have options in terms of Buddhism, and I have options in terms of, oh, this stuff is good. So what I did was I began to expand, like a lot of people do, your sense of reality, and that all is accommodated in the sixth chakra, as is your sense of judgment, your sense of wisdom, whether or not you are a wise and compassionate person. Interestingly, as I describe in Anatomy of the Spirit, what I do in that book is I take the Jewish tree of life and the power inherent in the tree of life and the 7 Christian sacraments, and I merge them with the 7 chakras, because all of them have 7 levels, and they all bring a certain quality of power that, if you understand it, totally is what the body requires to live, because it is what the spirit requires to thrive within the body. And in the 6th chakra, you have the energy of compassion. Compassion. People think it's here. It's not. It's here. Compassion is in the ability not to judge, to withhold judgment. That's what reality is about, to have an open mind, to allow the mind of another to thrive next to you, to view others with the wisdom of Solomon, This is what makes this part of your body thrive. That's the sixth chakra. And the seventh is what I call your grace bank account. That's where you store your prayers, where your kind thoughts of life, where your ability to appreciate life as well as others gets stored. And I honestly believe this, that when you find yourself in trouble or find yourself in fear, what I tell my students is I want you to picture pulling a cord and all this energy comes down that immediately helps create acts of synchronicity, bails you out, makes the phone ring just when you need it for someone you need it to ring with or from. And that when you pray, when you pray this way, you don't pray like a stuffologist. The first way people learn how to pray is as a stuffologist. You know, God, give me stuff, bless my stuff, can I have more stuff? Is my stuff sleeping with someone else's stuff? You're a stuffologist. Eventually you learn to pray with this way, which is, if this is the stuff you want me to have, then I pray, give me the grace to appreciate my stuff just in the package it came in, because there must be good reasons for it. Let me pray without judgment. That opens this. And eventually you pray with gratitude, not just for yourself, but you begin to realize that no matter when you walk down the street, no matter who you see, no matter what, that when you share a kind thought, you see someone who's can't walk as well as you, or someone who just seems like they're so incredibly stressed out or so lonely. I did that this morning. I went to get something at one of those little 7-Elevens, and I saw this man buying a lottery card, a lotto card. I looked at him and I said, I hope you win it. You have such a nice attitude. I wish you could have seen his face. He looked at me and his eyes got as big as saucers, and he said, well, thank you, ma'am. I'm telling you, what I realized is I didn't just give him a good thought. I could feel the power of that kind thought pouring into him, where I think he's going to feel lucky for 3 months. Not because it was me, but because someone gave him a kind thought who wished him abundance. I would hope that Norm Shealy and I could, and we of course are always chatting about this, develop a educational model where people can study medical intuition and then do residencies with physicians, as I did with Norm, because it's not something that you can learn in a week's seminar and then turn around and start evaluating the health of your friends. I mean, I won't let any of my students even consider that that's what they can do. But rather they have to do a residency program in exactly the way I did with Norm for several years. But I believe that medical intuition is going to become a necessary skill to the future, because we are becoming energetic human beings. Energy is becoming our first language. What do you think email is? Energy mail. What do you think the internet is, if not a physical manifestation of the way we interact with each other energetically all the time on this planet? All we've done is duplicated the way we've been all the time, and if it wasn't for the fact that we were always interconnected with each other energetically, we couldn't have even built the internet. That's where that inspiration came from. So I think that this is the direction we're going, because the fact is we are becoming an energetic culture. In the same way we once moved from agricultural to industrial, we are now going from industrial to energetic.